Apple Card is the credit card created by Apple. You earn 3% daily cash back up front when you use it to buy a new iPhone 15, AirPods, or any products at Apple. And you can automatically grow your daily cash at 4.15% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings accounts by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, member FDIC. Terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Columbia Sportswear. It's snowing again, and that wind chill is killer. But you're not worried about that because you shop the Omni Heat Infinity Collection. It's warmth perfected with tiny gold dots that reflect your body heat inside and protect you from the cold outside. No snow or chilly temps can stop you now. Go out anyway. Shop the Omni Heat Infinity Collection now at Columbia.com/infinity.
In sports, the scoreboard doesn't tell the full story, but Netflix does. Stories about dads who happen to be world-class quarterbacks and a battle for the heart, soul, and direction of the multi-billion-dollar business of F1. Whether you're a diehard fan or you're brand new, Netflix has the stories for every type of fan. You can watch these incredible sports stories like Quarterback, F1 Drive to Survive, Untold, and many more now on Netflix.
Serie Chronicles is a Media Chronicles production.
The logical thing to do is not to take Manchester City toe for toe and actually play a possession game, but rather sit a little bit deeper, be, the way that you would imagine this to go, a pragmatic type of game, and you counterattack. And so this is more about efficiency and attack for me than it is about defensive prowess.
It's 2 down, 1 to go for the Italian teams in Europe. Our hopes are falling week by week. Roma couldn't do it against Sevilla. Fiorentina, heartbreak in the final minute. I suppose it wasn't the final minute, given that never-ending injury time we got at the end of the match. Nearly the final minute against West Ham. Mina is with me as always. We've still got Inter in the Champions League final to come. Mina, how are you feeling this morning after the Fiorentina defeat?
Have you noticed that it's always Inter that has to rescue Italian football? I remember 2010, we were going to lose the 4th place in the Champions League, right? Unless Inter defeated Bayern and we could delay it by a year. Yeah. And it was like they had to defeat Bayern to keep Italy relevant and have 4 spaces, And I'm like, come on, guys. And they did it. And now it's on them again after the 2 others couldn't make it in the final. So Inter, please do it for Italian football. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of Italian finals that we've all lost, European finals rather. So it's in your hands, yet again, to rescue the reputation of Calcio. But I honestly, it was interesting because just before we started recording, you said that when you thought about which team was going to probably win most likely to win a European final, you thought of Fiorentina. I thought of Roma. How interesting. You didn't think Mourinho?
Well, I think with Roma, it was just because they were playing Sevilla, and Sevilla sort of win Europa Leagues, don't they? So that was my one sort of counter thought.
Interesting.
But I'll tell you what, Mina, we will definitely talk more about Fiorentina and the Conference League final. We're going to have a proper discussion about that game. But we reckon that probably people tuning in today are most wanting to hear about this Champions League final between Inter and Manchester City. So let's jump straight into that. It's been a frankly difficult week for me, to be honest. I was supposed to go to Milan on Sunday night to cover the media day on Monday. Had 2 flights cancelled, Ryanair and Wizz Air, so I didn't actually get to Milan. I've been trying to make all sorts of chaotic fixes to speak to people as best I can this week. The message coming from Inter a lot, if I had to sum up the theme of the Inter players' conversations, of course, been lots of individual conversation interesting, it's that they quietly back themselves, Mina. They definitely is like a quiet sort of thought amongst these Inter players that yes, City are the favourites, yes, they're the best team in the world. Inzaghi said that, the best team in the world. But also, yes, we think we are capable of beating them in a one-off game of football. What do you think? I mean, just the big question first. Do you think this is a lost cause, or do you think Inter are in this match?
Okay, so part of being a journalist is being a politician nowadays. Yeah. Well, you have to be very diplomatic in all your conversations. So I've done the Manchester City pod. I've done all of these, podcasts for English TV mainly, in which I'm like, well, obviously City is the better team. But here's the chance for me to be like myself a little bit more. And I'm like, they're going to...
The City fans aren't listening, Mina. They're not listening.
This is what I'm like. I'm like, yes. It's like when you close the door. And I was going to say, if you're a woman and you take off your bra, but it was just one of those where you can really just hang loose, and just be yourself. And this is my safe space.
That's what we are. It's bras off in here today.
Yeah, bras off. Let's chat. Oh God! I always don't know how it goes down this way, guys.
Oh God! Poor producer Simon is already leaving.
More cancellations on Patreon.
He's literally gone. He's gone.
Has he actually?
He's come back.
Is it safe in here?
Apology. There's so often that I speak that Simon replies with TMI. So apologies. I didn't imagine it going that way, but I was just trying to explain that this is a safe space, So. Mm-hmm. In my eyes, I'm like, listen, bitch, you better win this. This is how I want to speak to Inter right now, And I'm like, I'm almost like losing my mind on this. Like, you have to rescue us in this last final. And you know what? I'm also quietly confident. You may think I'm crazy. Yes, I understand. They don't have the whiz kids of Manchester City. They don't have the finances of Manchester City. They don't have Pep Guardiola, who is apparently the world's greatest coach. Who is certainly one of the very best. Greatest, debatable. But I still I feel like Inter have enough to produce a challenge. And I think that's all you need in a one-off game. Things can happen that you'll never see coming. And I think there's enough combative energy, enough quality in midfield, enough options up front to do damage. In all honesty, I went to the FA Cup final. I watched Manchester City live, and they're just, in that particular game, and I do say it's that particular game because it's not like I've gone to all Manchester City games, so, just having somebody like, Fred, Casemiro, and Aaron Wan-Bissaka, who is just very in the mood, who aren't really, I think, in fact, Inter have better players than those three, if I'm just comparing, and maybe not Casemiro. I didn't find Manchester City to be all that amazing. I'm saying up against a physical team that is interested in trying to sort of be the underdog and try to win. I honestly think that Inter are more than capable of doing some damage here, especially if in any way, shape or form, Manchester City start to doubt themselves or start to overthink this. And Istanbul is not an easy atmosphere. It is a very difficult atmosphere. And I think that it will be really interesting to see whether or not what the crowd will be like, because City have marveled at home. But away and in different locations, when they don't have all of their home support, there have been some missteps at times. So whereas Inter have actually thrilled away from home. So I'm interested to see.
Hey gang, just wanted to let you know that you can now get a free 14-day trial of our Chronicles Tifosi Patreon membership.
Subscribe now for free for 14 days to get access to all of our full episodes, solo minisodes, bonus content, even behind the scene bonuses like our chats about football, and of course our chats about life in general. You can also get the entire back catalogue of Serie A Chronicles content.
So head over to serieachronicles.com/Patreon and subscribe to the Chronicles Tifosi membership for free. I'm actually super curious to see how things play out with the crowd. I in general, I expect English fans to travel in bigger numbers when there's Champions League games because they tend to travel in big numbers. They tend to be loud. It's frankly, there's some just like a parallel to the reality of the league. Sometimes there's more disposable income in England in general, so fans can travel more easily. I think that's one of the things we saw with the West Ham and Fiorentina last night. Someone was asking me about why there were so many sections in the Fiorentina end. It's because it's expensive. It costs a lot of money to get there. One of the many subplots this game I was looking at earlier of course, you've got Hakan Çalhanoğlu, who's the Turkey captain, playing for Inter. On the other hand, Gundogan, who has got Turkish parents, plays for Germany, Turkish parents, is also playing for City. So I don't know if the Turkish crowd will pull one way or the other. I'll be curious to see it. But I think Çalhanoğlu is certainly hoping he might get a favourable reception. I think one of the things that sort of has really struck me with Inter's approach to the game is, I mean, first of all, sort of this thing which you just talked about, Mina, the pressure. I thought Federico Di Marco spoke to it really well. He's so easy to warm to, Di Marco, because he is just this fan, who's managed to sort of go and become a really important player for his team. And I do think he's underestimated quite how good he's been for them this season, when you think that he's only behind De Bruyne and Vinicius Jr. for assists in the Champions League this season. But he said at one point on Monday, well, you know, for us, it's a dream to win the Champions League. For them, it's an obsession. And I thought that was sort of one of those little comments you think is just quietly, again, just shifting the pressure off us and onto you, you know, like, we're just here for the dream. Like, we're chasing something that would be incredible. For you guys, it's like, you need it. And yeah, I do think that's an interesting dynamic, how that affects the game.
Do you think they should be quietly confident?
Maybe it's worth sort of looking at sort of different areas of the pitch and asking these questions, because I do think if you go player for player, it's hard to make the case that City aren't stronger. They are.
Of course, they're stronger, of course.
But you still sort of want to look at battles that are going to happen on the pitch. And, you know, I think that without question, for me, one of the battles that I'm most intrigued about, and I don't necessarily think breaks well for Inter, is Erling Haaland against presumably Francesco Acerbi. Like, you assume that. Obviously, City are a fluid team. They don't keep completely static roles, but Haaland is very much a centre forward. And Acerbi has very much made himself into sort of the man marker of the main number 9. That's what he's been at Inter. And he's such an odd player, Acerbi, because I think because he's 35 years old, because he is from a different generation slightly compared to all these young and exciting players on both teams, he sort of gets considered like a dinosaur. But he's not, you know, he's not Giorgio Chiellini. He's not in your face, like shouting and bellowing and roaring on you. He's sort of awkward in the way that he looks, and in the way that he doesn't look imposing, I don't think, like you sort of think that traditional centre back does. But what he does do is just read the game really well and get in your way and tread on your toes and be in those spaces and understand things. And I almost feel like at both ends of the pitch, if Inter are going to do this, it comes down to that sort of, old is a terrible word because we're talking about people who are younger than me, but old man wisdom of Acerbi at one end and Dzeko at the other end, just reading the game well, just having seen enough of these, sort of having been around long enough to see enough games to understand that it's all football and you can read it better. But yeah, I do think Acerbi versus Haaland is a fascinating battle, and one that will define Inter's chances from a starting point. Because of course, if Haaland scores 3 times, that's it, isn't it?
It's weird because obviously Haaland is obviously the biggest threat that you're going to be going up against. But one thing that I have to say that Inzaghi is very good at, and there's been a lot of debate this week, I guess internally in my head, as to how good Inzaghi is, because he does thrill at certain moments, and at other times I'm not entirely sure how I feel about him. But one thing I thought he did really well against Milan, and I'm not trying to compare, you know, the level of technique offered in Milan to the one, you know, by Manchester City. But I thought he had a really good plan to stop Rafael Leão. And obviously we'll never really see how good it was because Leão was coming back from injury. So we're not expecting him to be at the time at full flow and at the best of his abilities. He wasn't in the finest form. But I thought that the tactical plan to cage him at the time was a really interesting one, because there was plan A, there was plan B, and there was plan C. It was like how the midfielder was going to help, how they were going to contract, how there was just this whole plan to stop Rafael Leão. And it's much easier to do that when your team has sort of, you know, 1 or 2 great stars. I remember in a game in which sort of they were like defending against Barcelona at the time, and I don't remember who it was, but it was like, let them beat us with Neymar as long as we just take care of Messi. So something, you have to take risks. You have to let sort of one person perhaps not have as much attention. But with City, it's like, all right, we can take care of Haaland. And then there's Bernardo Silva, or there's Ilkay Gundogan, or there's like 1,000 others that can come and do something special. So I don't know if, putting all your attention on Haaland, yes, of course, you're going to have to do that. And I feel like Acerbi can do that. But Inter, for me, as much as they have managed some really good defending, they're also a team that can sometimes concede a lot of goals, like the 3 goals against Benfica, the 3 goals against Barcelona in Camp Nou. So defensively, they're not the team that I would say, yeah, go out and play that game. I don't trust them to. I don't trust them to defend immensely well. I don't see this as a backline of what Juventus used to have, for example. What I do think they do have is actually an ability to score. So I'm hoping that at some point they can just score enough goals to make it a tense situation. And that's what we want, because when it becomes tense, it becomes a lot more even. And channeling your emotions in the right way, trying to make the most of, because we have, you have Çalhanoğlu who can do something from a set piece or from a free kick or from distance. He can have a shot from distance that can make the difference. The logical thing to do is not to take Manchester City toe for toe and actually play a possession game, but rather sit a little bit deeper, be, the way that you would imagine this to go, a pragmatic type of game, and you counterattack. They have enough of a direct threat to make the difference there. It's just about whether or not, how long their defense can really hold up against this and what they can do in the other end. And so this is more about efficiency and attack for me than it is about defensive prowess, because I don't know how much I trust this team. And my other question to you, one question I have for you is Milan Skriniar. If he's capable of playing in this game, would you bring him on?
It's such a difficult question, isn't it? And Inzaghi sort of said that he was being asked about whether you start Dzeko or Lukaku alongside Lautaro, and he said, I've got questions in attack, I've got questions in midfield, I've got questions in defence, and I think Skriniar has to be the big one at the back. For me personally, I think it's been too long. I think it's been too long since he played, but I'm not there at training, Mina. If Inzaghi's been watching him at training and thinks, no, he's sharp, like he looks like he does, then Inzaghi will have a different perception of it. But to me, it's just it's such a game to come in too rusty. And you're dead right. Like Inter are such an odd team because they've kept 5 clean sheets in 6 Champions League knockout games. And you think, okay, that's like a good defensive sign. They're not. They're not that. They're not a totally stable defending team. Acerbi, as we said, has shown himself to be quite a good man marker. I think Bastoni has made some real strides this season in terms of being a defender who can come out and play the ball, who can sort of contribute going forwards. Of course, he played that brilliant ball for Barella to score from the first goal against Benfica. So I like him a lot, but do I think he's a flawless defender? No. And Matteo Darmian likewise. He's someone who's been around and who I think has matured into a sort of solid, trustworthy person, but he's not a brilliant defender. And I do think that the chance for Inter, because Inter know they're not going to have most of the ball, and they're comfortable with that. They've played, even though in general in Serie A they tend to hold more of the ball because they're one of the best teams in the league. They've played plenty of games with less of the ball. They did it even against Fiorentina. That they don't mind giving the ball up because they can do that. What Inzaghi's Lazio used to do. They can be a coiled spring. They can come out at you very fast. In fact, I think probably they'll relish that in this game.
Yeah.
But then it does rely on that ability to win the transitions. And I do think, funnily enough, the left-hand side for Inter, the right-hand side for City is going to define a lot of it because Di Marco has been so good going forward, because he is the guy who puts those good crosses in, and because Bastoni is behind him on that side, that is the side that I think Inter most naturally progress out of defence from. And I also think that Silva can get caught at the pitch, and I think that Kyle Walker can have very good games, but I'm not sure he always does. So I think that is one of the areas in which this game is going to be defined a bit, is certainly how well Inter can transition defence to attack and whether they can turn those into genuinely dangerous moments when they do it. And I think, for me, certainly, maybe I just don't have a very high opinion of Denzel Dumfries, and that's part of this. But I think the left-hand side is where Inter need to look to do it.
My issue with that is actually, I think Kyle Walker did a really good job on Vinny. And this is the thing. I think that what was so good about that game
very different, though. That's a very different kind of threat. Vinicius Jr. is nothing like, in terms of how he plays. He's a better player, but he's very different in what he does to Di Marco. Di Marco's going to go to the sideline and put balls into the middle.
I guess my question is, in all of this, is that Kyle Walker has enough to stop that's what I'm afraid of. And I don't want them to rely on that side. I want them to have backup plans. And here's the thing, I think Inzaghi would. And I agree with you, because you look at Dumfries and that's your other option, right? Because, it's either Di Marco doing something or it's not. But I actually think, no, I don't actually know what I think, because sometimes I think, fine, go through the middle, right? Because they're probably going to block that route with Kyle Walker. So you go through the middle. You're going to go through the middle if it's a perfect midfield, right? Like everywhere you look, it's so difficult when you're trying to analyze how to do it. The only way to do it really is with pace, is a little bit of, I guess, what West Ham did with Jared Bowen yesterday. It is like trying to win the ball really quickly and charge forward. Like you said, a spring. However I look at this, I think to myself, I start off with being really optimistic about Inter's chances. Then I start talking to myself and having a debate. And by the end of it, I'm like, no, that's it. It's a third loss, And I'm all of a sudden really depressed, because I think of all the opportunities and I don't know how it's possible that they can overcome it. The only thing that I always cling on to is that they don't enjoy themselves, Manchester City, when they play Spurs. They never enjoyed themselves against Spurs. Spurs was probably, obviously under Antonio Conte, they were the most Italian team in the league. They're very direct, very vertical. And I think that that's what Inter need to be, because that's always been, or seemingly has been, City's sort of failure, I guess, the one weakness, which they have addressed and they have certainly improved upon. But there is still a little bit of a chink in that armor. It's just about whether or not this is going to be an Inter side that has 28 shots and come out with one goal, or has 28 shots and scores 4 of them. And it's about efficiency going forward. And they really have to be able to be good with the atmosphere. I think that's the most important thing, because I think both these sides are very emotional sides. Both Manchester City and Inter can be very emotional sides. And I think Inter have been really brilliant this season in Europe when it's come to dealing with that level of pressure. In the knockout games, they haven't shown us in any way to be frail. They went to Camp Nou and were happy to play their game. And honestly speaking, they should have won it. It was that last minute with Aslani and it just didn't go to plan. But otherwise, I think that away from home, they haven't at all ever been gobbled up by the atmosphere. And that is what I think is something that they will need to show us, because at their best, when they're interested, the only way I see into winning this is if they start off with the same madness that they started off in the match against Milan. High intensity, go for it, try to score a goal as quickly as possible before anyone settles down, and then play your game. Sit back, counter. And I think that's the only way that I see it for me as them having a chance in this.
I think there's no way, no one in the world thinks that Inter can win this game 3-0. Whereas we know City can win this game 3-0.
Yeah.
Right? That's a possibility. On the scale of possible outcomes, Inter getting thumped is possible. Inter thumping Man City is not possible.
No.
So you immediately have an idea in your head of what kind of game that Inter can win. And it is a game which is probably not the most entertaining to watch. That is about sort of essentially killing time for a good part of the game, just because you know that, like West Ham against Fiorentina, frankly, you know that you need to let them have the ball, but just be more ruthless than they are. This is what, I don't know if I'm the same as you, Mina. Maybe this is just because this is like you said at the start, this is no one is going to tell us we can't, be happy's own right here on our podcast. But I do think that what makes me think it's possible for Inter, and again, I'm not making them favourites, what makes me think it's possible is that I think that they are a team that aren't always, they weren't horrible at this for a while this season, but they can be a team that will beat you with their one shot, because they have got Lautaro up front who, when he's on song, which he has been lately, can do it. Because they have got Edin Dzeko, who has been around the block enough times to know how to find that yard of space and score a volley at a corner like he did against Milan. Because they have got, even after that, Lukaku coming off the bench, they have got Çalhanoğlu who can score goals from midfield. They've got Barella, who's scored 6 goals in the league this season. They've got players everywhere who are capable of producing that. And I do think that in the admiration for City's quality, it sort of becomes easy to treat this Inter team like they're a bunch of chumps, which they aren't. I mean, those are really good players we're talking about there. And I think that's what makes me think it's possible. So maybe even talking about Di Marco on the left wing and all of it is a bit sort of futile, because in the end, it's going to come down to being opportunistic. And, we'll get to Fiorentina in a second, but I do think that one of the stories that made that Fiorentina final in the end on the Bowen goal, I think there's tiredness is part of it. And you see that Biraghi pushing out is so tired, and he's a step late in getting him offside. There are City players who are tired too. There's players at Inter who are tired. It's been a long season for everyone. But for instance, Rodri in the FA Cup final looked tired. He looked at the end of the game like he was exhausted. And it's looking for those moments of opportunity, that one player who takes a step too slow because he's tired. That's kind of what Inter probably need to live on, is where you find those moments, I think. I don't know, Mina, was there anything else that you sort of wanted to talk about at this game? I mean, I think we could talk ourselves around in circles, but I don't know if there's anyone in particular we haven't mentioned who you were keen to talk about.
Have you ever met Rodri?
I haven't, no.
So he was like standing like right there, and all I thought is, you are so well built. He's a very good-looking man in real life, and I don't know why I'd never noticed Rodri before. But just you bringing him up, and I was like, he is a very attractive man, and I guess I'd never seen that. Physically, he is so well. He's like a statue. I can't explain it. All of the others are just so tiny. I feel like if they were with me going to San Siro, they would also be scared, of taking a taxi home. But then there was Rodri, and you just see this, like, other than Haaland, who's also, like, obviously, just this. Yes. Anyway, I guess my only question to you,
I actually like really get, like, I get where you're coming from, because I think I really felt that, like, after the second leg of the semi-final, I was thinking that about Dzeko. Like, Dzeko, like, he should be like the one who looks sort of like, older than everyone, like a bit more. So he doesn't. He looks so fresh. Like, even at the end of a semi-final, all right, he came off in like the 66th minute or something, but he looks so fresh and so like just athletic. Even though they all look athletic, somehow he sort of has a different spark to him that I can't explain until you see him in person. Yeah, I think certain people do still have that, even amongst like elite athletes. Some people just sort of convey that sense of, I don't know what it is, like that sort of superpower about them.
Yeah, it's a little bit like, Bernardo Silva is the player that I would want most from my team. I mean, all of Man City is amazing, but I'm particularly fond of Bernardo Silva. And then you sort of look at him and I'm like, he kind of just looks like, I don't know how to explain, like a boy from school. You know what I mean? No, I mean, it's like, just, like a regular guy who's kind of not that much taller than me, you know what I mean? And then you see Rodri, and it is different when you see that kind of like big athlete. And I totally see what you're saying about Dzeko. I'm sorry, I do digress. I've totally taken this into a different question.
It's all right. Bras off.
What I was going to ask you is, would you start Lula? Because it looks like Dzeko might start.
I would start Dzeko. Because I think, for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think that actually like his know-how is really valuable here, because I think Inter need to be smart. Again, they're not going to be the better team in this game, but they can be smart. And I think Dzeko is smarter than Lukaku. Not as in like academic smarts. I have no idea how academically smart they are. I just think as a footballer, I think Dzeko, it's not even he's smarter than Lukaku. I think he's smarter than the vast majority of footballers, because he's experienced so much, right? Like he's won a league in Germany. He's scored 50 goals in 3 different, he's obviously won the league twice in England, and then he's come to Italy. He's scored 50 goals in all 3 of those leagues. He's played in big Champions League nights. He's helped turn around a 4-1 deficit against Barcelona. I think that's why Inzaghi has always gone to Dzeko on these nights, is because actually like just having been around the block enough times and being someone who internalizes that as well, because I don't think all players do, but I think Dzeko really has like learned all the way through his career, gives you an ability to make quick decisions on the pitch that is really valuable. And I think Dzeko makes snap decisions that are right a lot of the time. And I think that's really valuable to Inter. I also think the other side of it is, which of the two do you want to bring off the bench? I think you want to bring Lukaku off the bench, because Lukaku is in that sort of good bulldozer form that he can get into, where you think actually he could just score as a goal off the bench. And I think that way round works. I do understand why you might think the other way, because Lukaku and Lautaro have this understanding going back to the Conte days, and it clicks, it looks good. But I think I would like it the way that I think it will be, which is Dzeko first and then Lukaku second.
I came into this saying Lukaku in my head, but you've managed to convince me, all right, Dzeko should start. Also, it's like you said, also against a tiring midfield. I mean, and then to bring on Lukaku off the bench, and have that partnership with Lautaro just spring into life could be very interesting towards the end of the competition. And Dzeko is somebody who can find space when there isn't any. So, yeah. Okay, I hope Inzaghi is listening to this and be like, yes, my mind's made up. I'm going to start with Dzeko.
Yes. Nicky and Mina said it. It must be right. We should talk about the Conference League final, but let's get a quick prediction, Mina. I'll put you on the spot. What's the final score on Saturday?
Inter 2-1.
All right, I'll say 1-0. But still to Inter. There you go. Unanimous vote. It's going to be Inter. What could go wrong?
I think it's a penalty at the end. They managed to get into the heads of all the City players, you know. I just hope that they get into the heads of City players and not the other way around where Barella is going to be lifting his arms in anger, you know, and then it just starts to fall down. So let it be this way, guys. Be smart, you know. Italians, I was going to say Italians don't lose finals, but they are. So come on, guys.
All right. Conference League final was very sad from a Fiorentina perspective. I can't help but feel a bit heartbroken for them because it was such an extraordinary season. Again, 60 games, their longest ever season in terms of number of games played. They went to 2 cup finals, and in the end, they lost both of them 2-1. I was saying it earlier. For me, this game really came down to those moments and fine margins. And the 2 goals that Fiorentina conceded, the first is a handball by Biraghi. For me, it is a handball. I know there was a big debate about it online, but actually, the more I looked at it, the more I thought,
it's a handball.
I'm not even sure under the old rules that would be under question. You know, he moves his hand towards the ball, it pushes it away from a striker inside the box. It's a handball. It's a bummer, but it's a handball.
Mm-hmm.
Then the last goal was just such a shame because, as said, Biraghi, who's played 51 games this season, just doesn't step up quite as quickly as the rest of the Fiorentina back line, and that lets Bowen get through and be onside. Look, I've already said this on the Guardian podcast. Hats off to West Ham. It's a wonderful moment for them. I was hard not to be swept up in the joy of Bowen and Moyes and everything for them. But this is an Italian football podcast, so let's see it from the Italian side. Yeah, a real gut-wrenching moment for Biraghi, I thought, Mina. And I don't know, did you think that Fiorentina should have approached the game differently?
It's a difficult one because I wasn't really fond of the decision to start with Jovic. You know, I know that he had that chance at the very end of the first half, and obviously he scored a goal that was ruled offside. But I would have started with Cabral. I think it was the right decision. I think Fiorentina played better in the second half when they didn't, in fact, have him on the pitch, and he could make a difference. Bonaventura is a player I really enjoy watching. I forget sometimes how much I enjoy watching him because he sort of always slips out of my mind when I think of players that I enjoy watching, but he's definitely one of them. That goal that he scored and the way that they responded so quickly after the penalty, I thought was fabulous. I can't really, I guess in many ways, attack Italiano. I was a little bit disappointed at how many Fiorentina fans, at least on Twitter, did. And it started to make me wonder about Italian football fans because I think they're just out there like always yelling at their coaches, even though they've reached finals that they probably never imagined to reach, you know. So I always find it difficult when people are upset with their coaches. I don't know what I would fault them for. They were the top scoring team. They're up against a side. I mean, they make 25 million from revenue and broadcasting, and West Ham make nearly 200. I mean, there's a vast difference in financials, you know. They have a very good squad, don't get me wrong, but I do think I understand that even if they played the better football, I do think teams that play sometimes anti-football, as some of the commentators on Sky Italia referred to it, I don't think it was anti-football, but you know what they're like. Sometimes, you know, that's all you need, right? You just need to know how to spring the offside trap. You just need to be just that bit more switched on at the end. And like you said, Fiorentina had taken part in so many different games. Their season started on August the 18th. They had to qualify for everything. It's been really long and hard, and they don't have the squad depth that others can enjoy. And so that has been something for them, unfortunately. And these things happen, but like you said, it's fine margins.
It's not just the number of games as well. Like they played at the weekend. West Ham didn't. West Ham got to go and have like a weekend sort of training camp for the game in the Algarve, whereas Fiorentina had a game at the weekend. And I think that you know is a sort of an imbalance in the matchup. Like everyone knows it's hard to play 2 games in a week. Footballers talk about it all the time, playing 2 games a week all week. And so getting that week off, I think, I don't know, in a game that comes down to that comes down to if you just step up quicker, that's offside. it was hard for me not to think that was at least a factor in things.
Also, Biraghi, I was going to say his performance sort of took a hit after he took a hit, and I just think that kind of stuff, I don't want to be watching that in a final, like these sides haven't won a European final since the 1960s. Like, this is a grand occasion to go and do that. So it's a shame that you have fans out there who will try to ruin this in the way that they have and behave in the fashion that they did. And but I mean, it had an effect, right? Because that's all that it needed to do, because Biraghi just wasn't the same player after that. And I can completely understand.
Yeah, it's hard not to sort of think, how does that impact you? Like, how does that change your, even in subtle ways, like just your frame of mind the rest of the game? But the fact that he ends up being the man at the heart of both of the big things that go wrong for Fiorentina is certainly like, feels extra horrible. And it's, it's disgraceful what went on. I can't enter into the mindset of someone who spends a large amount of money to go travel to another country just to do that, to then you've got footballers who've been spending their entire year building up to something, and that because you support one of the teams, and to try to sort of just, physically assault them. That's what that is, throwing something at someone's head to cut it open. And I also think it's disgraceful that there wasn't really seemingly much plan for how to respond to it inside the stadium. There were cups thrown, several cups thrown at a corner minutes before I don't think it was a cup, I think it was something else that hit Biraghi and actually cut him. But minutes before the incident that ends up with him being cut, there were already cups being thrown and nothing happens. It's not impossible as a stadium operator or a governing body responsible for the stadium operator to have rules in place and to have firm statements like, we're stopping the match if this happens, and you could even impose a forfeit if you keep doing it. You should be, at a minimum, as the governing body, guaranteeing the physical safety of your players. That's a minimum. And even at the end of the game, when West Ham was celebrating, there was a bunch of West Ham fans who were on the pitch who shouldn't have been there, who didn't get removed. There was one point when Bowen was doing a post-game interview and he physically shoves away a fan who's a West Ham fan, but who's sort of interrupting his interview. And you just think, at a minimum, you've got to guarantee the players on the pitch better security than that. And yeah, I think that was really disappointing in a lot of different directions. And to preempt some of the whataboutery that I saw on Twitter last night, this is not a partisan thing. There were some Fiorentina fans in Prague who conducted themselves horrendously, fans or ultras, whatever you would prefer to call them. But there was a group that were, starting fights, attacking West Ham fans outside a pub who got arrested. It's all horrid. But none of that is Biraghi's fault. Biraghi wasn't outside the pub fighting West Ham fans, right? So he's the one who's had his night in a final that he spent the whole season working towards violated. And I find it, it's horrendous.
Yeah, it is horrendous. I thought it was a little bit, I understand Italiano is obviously very disappointed because he's lost 2 finals, but he did come out afterwards and said, I blasted Igor because, he should have run and tracked his marker quicker. And I know this sounds crazy, but is it fair to say that sometimes you watch a game and you change your mind about a particular coach? And I know it seems like a very hot take, but you're kind of like, I love Italiano. I think
you're turning on him, Mina.
I think he's brilliant. I do have always a problem with coaches who, and this is kind of the problem I had with Maurizio Sarri as well, where their plan needs to be followed perfectly and mistakes obviously end up in losses. I do have issues with that. I guess one of the reasons why I do like Inzaghi, or why I've liked others, is because they know that mistakes are part of sort of the game, and they have a plan B and a plan C and a plan D as to, if a defender does get away from you, then what is the next plan? Because there are going to be mistakes. You can't always be perfect. Fatigue is an issue. And I guess sometimes he likes, as well as Maurizio Sarri, likes to play the perfect game in which you are perfectly concentrated and in which you play your tactics according to your plan, and they don't really take into account that they are human beings and that mistakes will happen. And so, for example, like when I look at Inzaghi and his plan for layout, it was like, right, you're my first point of contact. If he gets away from you, then you're going to be the guy that steps in and does this. And if he gets away from you, then this is what's going to happen. And I feel like there's always a plan there to try to come up with the potential of mistakes. And it's not about always being 90%, 100% switched on, where sometimes you understand that you ebb and flow in a game. And I sometimes think that Italiano takes too many risks with the way that he plays football. And where there is a potential of that happening, and he turns around and says, well, like, I blasted Igor, he should have gotten there quicker. I blasted this. And I understand his disappointment, but I also need him to understand that he needs to play a style of football at times that is just that bit more pragmatic, especially when, like you said, they played 3 days earlier or 4 days earlier, however long it was. And so they are somewhat exhausted. And I love his style of football, and I love the way that he trains. And I do think that every year he gets better and better. And when I say pragmatic, I don't mean defensive. I just mean allowing yourself mistakes and overcoming that. And so that is something that I keep going back and forth when it comes to Italiano, because I think that he's just such a tremendous coach, but there's just things about him that I think he asks too much. That's all.
There's so many individual stories in his stories. Now, you mentioned Bonaventura, and I'm heartbroken for him, because I think he's sort of one of those players who's really he's not been lucky in his career.
No.
I think he went to Milan at a time when Milan were all over the place and was sort of the one reliable piece in that puzzle for a long time, and really sort of grew and adapted as a player, went from being this winger at Atalanta into something more versatile and central to the team. And then, he gets to this stage and he scores a brilliant goal, and you think maybe it's his moment to finally get to celebrate after this, the two big injuries as well in the middle of his career, and get something, and it doesn't happen for him. So I was definitely heartbroken for him. I thought Amrabat had a great game and reminds us of how good he was in the World Cup. And there were lots of great performances for Fiorentina. It's been an incredible season for them, even so. But I know that's not going to be much consolation after losing a cup final, is it?
Well, they might make it into the Conference League if Juventus is knocked out by UEFA. So there's still hope they can have a chance at European football, We'll see next season if they can do better.
There is. And at time of recording, no word yet on whether Italiano is off to Napoli, which lots of people have assumed. De Laurentiis was saying in his most recent comments, well, I'm not thinking about Italiano. It's disrespectful to think about someone who's under contract, and my list of 10 has grown to 22 and now to 40 coaches. We'll see. I think he fits the bill, but no guarantees. We'll find out. I tell you where there has been some movement, Mina, is at Milan. Paolo Maldini, gone. And Ibrahim Diaz not having his the option taken up to turn his loan into a permanent deal. Big changes at Milan. Let's start with Maldini, because I think that's what everyone's talking about. What do you make of this, Mina? And do you want to give people a bit more context on what happened?
Well, here's the thing. There's a lot of conflicting news out there as to the reasons behind the fractured relationship between Milan's new management and Maldini and Massara. So obviously, as we know, there's been growing tension apparently between management and between Maldini. Not apparently, I think it's been there for some time. And the reasons behind it are interesting to me because they've all been very different. I've spoken to two people, and both of them told me such different things. I'm like, don't know where the real stuff is, When I say people, I mean, like, one of them is a journalist who's followed Milan all their life, and so I was like, you're going to know because you speak to these guys every day. And he's like, no, this is what it is. And then someone else told me something entirely different. So the news right now is actually the fractured relationship is because, at the end of the day, Maldini wants to have more control, wants to be able to have a lot more investment, to be able to pick the right players. And Cardinale had said to him, who is the new owner of Milan, had said to him, I want to do things my way. I'd like you to stay, but to be sort of the man in between the players and management, but not have the control that you have right now, where you're going and choosing the players and scouting and negotiating on our behalf. That was rejected outright from Maldini. He obviously isn't interested in a role that basically is there. He's not really actually doing anything. And he was like, nope, that's not what I want to do. He feels that in order to grow and plan a brighter future for Milan, he needs to have better investment and more support from the powers that be. And Cardinale has chosen a different route to that. Cardinale is a man who's more interested in somebody like Moncada. That's it. Somebody who is who obviously is a great scout, who studies the opponents, who has a specific algorithm for how he chooses certain players. Obviously, the man who worked at Monaco and had looked and studied Mbappe and chose him to be the guy that they should bet on. He's into data. He has this perfect plan to obviously do things at low cost and understand a human being, not just the player, but rather his relations. And he wants to bet on that rather than Maldini and Massara. Others have obviously pointed out to the fact that the tension as well had a lot to do with Pioli, which at the time I was quite stunned at, because, Pioli is the man that Maldini bet on. He's the man that he wanted and pleaded with management to make sure that Ranić wasn't the man, but rather Pioli stayed in power. And now there are obviously question marks about the relationship between Maldini and Stefano Pioli. I think Maldini feels like some players could have been offered a bit more of an opportunity just to see what they were like. And Pioli sort of outright didn't play a lot of these guys in a consistent level or gave them enough time to prove themselves, and rejected the players that Maldini had chosen on the transfer market. I understand that sometimes a coach and Maldini won't always be on the same page and they will have differences in opinion, but that was one of the theories floated as to why Cardinale chose to sack Maldini. I can't imagine that the situation was bad enough for that to be the decision. So I find that really hard to believe. So this is the line that I was fed at that point, and it's actually noted in Gazzetta as well. And I find that difficult to believe. I just cannot imagine that Pioli would be like, yeah, I don't really want to work with you anymore. Pioli, like the world's number one company man, I know that there are things like, Maldini is not somebody who wants to bow down to the ultras, whereas Pioli does. There's going to be differences in opinion, and Pioli's right to not like the transfer market or the players that he was given. And Maldini is also right to think that everyone has an opinion, and I'm sure that they disagree many times, but I cannot believe that the tensions are so bad that they want to separate. But Cardinale should be allowed to, I guess, in many ways, see his vision realized, even if many of us think it's a poor route to take. Maldini, at the end of the day, is in the fabric of Milan. He represents Milan. He's the symbol of Milan. And I think that when you see so many players like Rafael Leao, Theo Hernandez, Benacer come out and be so sad, it tells you something about what he offers, not just from a management perspective. I know we always talk about Maldini and his ability to scout or bring in the right players, or what he saw in Junior Messias and so on and so forth. But I do want to say that you cannot downplay the importance of having someone like that on your side, to have someone like that who is happy to have an espresso with a player, to allay their fears, to be their friend, especially someone like Tomori, for example, who really benefited from having that relationship with Maldini. And I think that they're really going to miss that. And I think they've not realized his importance enough. And it's all good to make money, but it's more important to keep the soul of the club together.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that last point is so important, Mina. I think the number of players that I've spoken to or heard in other interviews talking about the factor that Maldini was and them deciding to come to the club, the impact that he has just by being around, not someone you talk to every day like Pioli, but just the sort of someone you can go to for words of wisdom sometimes. I think it's a big loss for Milan, whatever the reasons behind it. And I think it's going to hurt the club's recruitment this summer, honestly. Although I think you can also accept that doesn't mean that Maldini and Massara are above criticism. Obviously, they're going to carry the can in a big way if De Ketelaere doesn't improve. And the De Ketelaere situation is now very interesting, isn't it? Because with Brahim Diaz gone, suddenly the onus is even more on him to become the player they hoped he would. I think there's some real work needs to be done by Milan if they're going to be competitive next season in terms of bolstering that attack. It was already too thin, and Diaz going does not help. So tough summer coming up for them. At Juventus, Max Allegri has been confirmed. He's going to be back, Mina. She can't even keep a straight face. She's just immediately gone.
No, I feel like the fans are about to top themselves any minute now. I find it all very entertaining. I mean, if you would think that a funeral's happening in Turin with some of the fans, and someone said it's the worst season of his life, and I'm like, yeah, sure, buddy, or if he stays, it will be the worst season of his life. And I just feel like, gosh, it's like you've just told them you have to make do with Roy Hodgson, oh poor Roy, he's very good. You know what I mean? But this is what I feel like now fans have been elevated to like such importance that they have the right to sort of give monologues to the team before a Champions League game, like at Milan, where their opinion matters more than anything, where they get to dictate, you know, who stays and who leaves. And at the end of the day, maybe Juventus will get it wrong or whatever it is, but do you have the money to pay to sack Allegri? Has he done the world's worst job? I mean, they still finished third. On the pitch, sul campo, they got the points, right? So, and they've navigated themselves in a very tricky situation. But he is staying, probably right to have started from scratch. But if you don't have a lot of money, then you need to build on your foundations. I guess they feel like it's better to just stick with Allegri for a little bit more time and see what can happen. I don't know what the choices are, because if you want a top level coach, he's not going to choose Juventus right now. They're out of the Champions League. They're even out of the Europa League. Not that that was going to entice somebody like Zinedine Zidane. But what that means for the future of certain players, I think, is also something that's overly exaggerated about sort of this break in the dressing room. Federico Chiesa has been somebody that has been spoken about, and his relationship with Allegri has been spoken out for many years. And actually, he was specifically asked about how he felt about Allegri sort of 3 months into Allegri's tenure when he came back. And he said, I've never had a problem with him, but people always make a lot of it at the time. And this is after he had done this tremendous, played this tremendous game against Chelsea. Friend of the show, Adriano Del Monte, tells us that he is very unhappy. And I believe that I can understand why Chiesa would be unhappy with Allegri. And that could well be like that's going to be a problem between them. Chiesa has said that he's staying, Allegri is staying, so they're going to have to find a way of being together. But at the end of the day, Chiesa is a great player, but he hasn't done anything yet. I mean, and by that I mean he hasn't won something yet to have this much power, where people are like now thinking of him as like the star that deserves everything in life. I'm not entirely sure of yet. I do think there's so much that he needs to learn, and then people sort of look how many mistakes that he does make and how selfish he can be, and how many different people have spoken about that. And yes, Antonio Cassano is one of them, and he seems to have something to say about everyone. But you have to note what...
As Cassano's job now is having an opinion on everyone.
And everyone. I mean, he's somebody who called him selfish. If you look at Bonucci saying he's growing, he's learning how to... But he is somebody who sort of lives too much for his own individual quality, for his own individual ability on the ball. Being part of a team is very different to that. I mean, that was something that Tevez spoke about, right? Because under Antonio Conte saw him as a potential to be turned into a beast, somebody who can score tons of goals. Under Allegri, he was actually taught to be more part of the team and play with Morata, improve Morata, and ended up being really good for both of them in the end. So it is about working together. A lot was made of the relationship with Szczesny, but Szczesny actually is a huge Allegri fan. I know that, you know, he's somebody who doesn't like the style of football. He came out after the Europa League and spoke about it. But Szczesny is also indebted to Allegri because, and actually even Fabio Paratici, because at the time Donnarumma was free and they were thinking of going for him, but Allegri believed in Szczesny, Paratici believed in Szczesny. And he feels very much like he's loyal to he's definitely loyal to Allegri. So he may speak about him, but it doesn't mean he's against him. Rabiot is thinking of extending because of Allegri. And so, but of course, Vlahovic hasn't shown us his best. I don't know how he feels. Like right now, Juventus probably won't be in Europe, and he's come to win trophies. He's come to do something special. But he also came because he told us he's a Juventus fan. So which is it? So it'd be interesting to see. I don't know which way it's going to go. I hope it gets better. The situation is diabolical at the moment in many different ways, just from a economic point of view, from, you know, a sporting point of view. But I'm hopeful, because if Gentoli doesn't arrive now, he'll arrive in a year's time. And you can't always be at the top of your game. I think it's normal sometimes that there are cycles for teams, and it takes a while to rebuild those cycles, like we're seeing with Barcelona, and they've just gone back to winning the league. And you never know what will happen in the future.
There's still so many more things we could get to today, but I need to speed us towards a conclusion. So I'm just going to quickly rattle through some things that have happened since we last won together. Gianpiero Gasperini, like Allegri, looks like he's going to be staying at Atalanta. Has obviously had the chat he needed to have about what the plans for the club were and is like what he heard. Did talk about some of these in voice notes. Ibrahimovic is retiring and had his big send-off, Quagliarella as well. Obviously, we've got the play-out coming out between Spezia and Verona, the relegation playoff. That's happening on Sunday, we now know, and 7:45 p.m. UK time. Adjust accordingly, according to where you are in the world, 8:45 p.m. local time.
Who's going to win?
Oh, I think Verona, but I'm not confident. I don't know, Spezia. I almost feel like Verona maybe might. I've just said that I think Verona, because I think they've got more about them, but I think they might also be weighed down by that feeling that they should be the team that was already safe, having blown it on the second last weekend. So maybe that will undo them. But 90 minutes, then penalties is how it's going to play out. And we'll talk about that on Monday. There's so much that we can talk about with the transfer window. Sergej Milinkovic-Savic not staying at Lazio. It's expected. Contract's going to be up. So where's he headed? How does Abraham's cruciate ligament injury affect Roma's transfer opportunities? We'll talk about those things on Monday. Quick mention to the Italy under-20 team who will play South Korea in the semi-finals of the World Cup. Forza Azzurri. So, if we don't get any European winners, maybe Mina will get an under-20 World Cup winner. We'll see. And so that's it for today. Mina, I think you've got a couple of shout-outs for us.
Yes, we just want to welcome 2 new Tifosi members. Hello and welcome to Alexander Henao and to Matthew Hood. Hello and welcome to the Serie A Chronicles podcast. We hope you enjoy staying with us. That's all we have time for today, but we will be back on Monday to review, obviously, more of what happened in the Champions League. Hopefully we will be celebrating and completely drunk. Rather than crying yet again. We will also be coming to you with our views on the relegation playoff. Should be very interesting. Do find us on Twitter at Nicky Bandini, at Mina Rzouki, and of course at Serie A Chron Pod. And subscribe to Serie A Chronicles on YouTube for clips and short videos of the show. Thank you so much for listening, and ciao for now.
Helping myself to a large glass of something at the end of this week, one way or another, because I am exhausted already and it's only Thursday.
I'm sort of over it, to be honest with you. I feel like I don't even want to watch this one anymore.
I'm really looking forward to the game. I just want to be done with these preview pieces. Yesterday, I started work at 6 a.m. I don't mean got up. I mean, I started writing at 6 a.m. and I finished working when the stand thing finished at 11 p.m. That was a day.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this basketball season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of stats, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and injury insurance on your picks are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million players who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/get100 and use code GET100. That's code GET100 at prizepicks.com/get100. For a first deposit matchup to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.